contributes towards violence, and racism is a factor that contributes towards violence. We're always going to have hate crimes, and so it seems, so we have this tendency to focus on fixing the end result, in this case, the commission of criminal offenses, or in another context, removing the discrimination by putting sexual orientation into the Human Rights Code, all of which needs to be done, but we never really address what the real issues are that lead to those things happening.
I see. And John Fisher, you have last word on this topic.
Oh, well, I agree with Tom entirely that we have to look at fixing things at the outset, to look at particularly the education system. I agree also with Wesley that the issues are inseparable. The same kinds of biases which are systemic in society are systemic within other institutions, including lesbian and gay organizations and institutions. It's something that we have to take very seriously, and which we are working very hard to resolve, both in the context of race, but also a lot of organizations have been dominated by males in the past, by people from larger cities rather than from smaller communities, by people who are able-bodied. And I think that it's a responsibility we all share to seek to practice what we preach and make our organizations as accessible and equal as possible.
Well said. Thank you to all our panelists. This is part one of trying to deal with heterosexism and homophobia in our society. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Hello and welcome back to our show, The Next Generation. Our topic tonight is discrimination and prejudice toward gays and lesbian people. You've heard from part one various perspectives from different people and professions, and we'll have an open discussion from those people in part two. But before we do that, I'll just give a brief explanation or definition of what heterosexism is and homophobia. Heterosexism is a negative valuing and discriminatory treatment of individuals and groups who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgendered, or those perceived to be so, and those affiliated with them. Heterosexism is based on social values which teach everyone ought to be heterosexual. Expressions of dislike, hate, or fear based on heterosexism is known as homophobia. Like all prejudices, it is based on a set of myths and stereotypes, which it offers to then justify. It is destructive to the lives of people whose sexual orientation is homosexual. It is so pervasive that many same-sex-oriented people internalize its message and devalue their own ability to contribute to the world. Our first speaker or guest is John Fisher from Equality for Lesbian and Gays Everywhere. John, did you have a particular area that you find particularly irritating, and would you have any comments or questions toward other panelists that you found of interest to you?
Oh, well, there are many things that I find irritating, but one thing that particularly angers me, which upsets me, is the way in which I feel the need, wherever I go, whatever I do as a gay man, to always have to justify the fact that I'm gay, to explain to people why this is okay, to have to answer questions like whether we're a large percentage of the population or a small percentage of the population, whether being gay is something which is genetic or whether it's something which is learned, whether this is moral or immoral. To me, none of that matters. The reality is this is who I am, and I know that's just fine. I know that this being gay is not my problem. The problem lies with those who can't understand that, who can't accept that, who are intolerant or have discriminatory attitudes. And it shouldn't fall to me and to others like me to always have to justify our basic right to participate equally in Canadian society. So that's something which I think is very destructive, both to me personally and to lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgendered people in Canada generally. But it is something that, as I indicated earlier, I believe is gradually changing. In terms of the discussion that we had earlier, I'd perhaps like to pick up on something that you said, Brian. You mentioned that in your view, society's fear of homosexuality is grounded in people's fear and misunderstanding of human sexuality generally. And I certainly think that is a part of it, that society has lots of misunderstandings and stereotypes about human sexuality. But I wonder if that classification of it doesn't define gays and lesbians too much as sexual beings, and if the intolerance that we face doesn't go beyond the hang-ups around sexuality. My relationship with my partner, for example, is not accepted by many, but it's not a relationship which is based wholly on sex. Of course, it's based upon the love we feel, the emotional aspects of our relationship, and as much as anything, it's people's inability to accept gays and lesbians as fully emotional and whole human beings, rather than just sexual beings, which holds us back.
Well, I think that's it exactly. I think that a huge issue in dealing with this area is dealing with the issue of fear within ourselves. And I think that one of our great failings has been in being able to deal as a society, which raises our offspring in our society, to know what to do when we fear something or someone. It is a very natural, widespread tendency in each human being. We know some things about it. We know that we tend to fear others when they are different. We fear difference. We know that we fear a situation in which something within ourselves is challenged or makes us uncomfortable. That's another form of fear. What we tend to do with a fear of difference is to make that difference huge, way bigger than it really is. And I think you're right on this issue, that one of the things we've done with this issue is make the sexual in people's lives much bigger than it really is. I mean, we only ask gay and lesbian and bisexual and transsexual people to explain their sexuality. Nobody goes around saying, why are you a heterosexual male? What does that mean? I mean, what's that all about anyway? I mean, nobody asked me that. People only ask gay and lesbian people to explain that sort of thing. They're on trial. We aren't on trial. And it is because what is quote unquote normative is not, it doesn't present any fear to other people to have to explain away and that sort of thing. I think that we have a major job to do apart from the very worthwhile battles we are doing in the legal areas and in social causes and stuff, to teach our children about fear and about difference and how to treat other human beings. It is an essential task for a human child to grow up knowing how to deal with difference and how to deal with perceptions of threat and fear within that person themselves. And I don't think we do a very good job of that.
Thank you, Brian. Mike Fay from Central Toronto Youth Services, and then Jessica Bell.
I'd just like to expand a bit on that theme. I think it's major if we consider the biggest task perhaps is to get straight people to stop being prejudiced. And having been there, I would speak a bit to it, meaning having been very prejudiced. The reality is that when young males respond and are prejudiced against other young males and they're growing up, it's all centered on sexuality. And so the issue becomes how do we educate people to realize that the sexuality of a homosexual relationship is no different than heterosexual. It's only a small piece of it, and the relationship piece is where it's, the importance is. And at the same time, the education can include, I mean, certainly what I do to straight males who would either be younger than me or my own age, and having to challenge people with their views, is to remind them that we are all, for example, it might be a ski trip. I'm with 10 males. They don't think anything of it. But if they see 2 homosexual guys go by, there's a big deal. And I have to challenge them to say, well, we're 10 of us are together. You don't seem to mind that. And the issue really is to try to take the sexual piece out of it as you're trying to educate people. Not that it's not important, but that's where the prejudice comes in terms of my own history of being prejudiced. I didn't look at 2 males and say they're wrong because they spend time together. I was fearful, didn't understand, prejudice, reacted to, whatever it was, to the sexual piece, because you thought about having sex with a guy, didn't fit your own thought of what was okay, so then the prejudice would enter that. And so it's even bigger than just realizing that it's a relationship. It really has to be remembered by those who educate. And I mean, who we're trying to educate here is the straight people who are prejudiced. And any time I attend a workshop function which is delivered by the staff who are experts, who are gay and lesbian, I notice that a lot of the people in the audience are gay and lesbian people who are already the believers. And the task is really to have larger audiences of straight people who are homophobic to start with, and then take them on. And, you know, I've done that, but I think that's what we need to do.
Okay. Don't let my hand signals cut you off. Jessica Bell.
I'd like to pick up on what Brian said, and to some degree on what Tom said earlier, on this issue that as a society we're really not comfortable with sexuality, period. And to question one thing which will have to be changed if we're going to ever do what has just been talked about, and that is that the most important thing that we learn from the time when we're born, when we meet someone, is what is their gender. It's the very first thing that you notice before you notice anything else. And if you don't know what it is, you don't know what to do. Why is this so important for us? Why is it so important for us to know what somebody's gender is? We don't have to set up a society where that is the most important issue. But I have a feeling that this is at the root of a lot of the difficulty we have with difficulties about different sexual orientation. We have this idea that you must be one thing or another thing, and you can't mix them both together. That males are supposed to behave one way and females are supposed to behave another way, and you can't have anything which looks like a mixture of the two. And this, Brian would bear me out on this. This goes back to a lot of purity rules in the biblical scriptures, that you may not have mixes of things. Only we have tossed out all the others. We've tossed out the fact that you can't wear something which is a mixture of wool and cotton. We've tossed out that you can't eat meat and dairy products together. But we still keep this other one thing. Either you're female and you're passive, or you're male and you're active, and any combination of those two makes us uncomfortable. So I think that's a basic issue that we'll have to deal with our children with these things.
Thank you, Jessica. Michael McKay from Ottawa Youth Services Bureau.
Yeah, there's so many issues I want to touch on, but what Jessica's talking about is fantastic. I don't know who was speaking of it, but there was some talk about individual actions. I think it was the survey that you're reading from Toronto, and I agree definitely that actions, like homophobic actions like violent acts, obviously they have to be reduced. But I think it goes beyond that, and it's something what Jessica's talking about, and it's that sort of total, flipping what the society is right on its side, and totally changing how we look at things and how we approach things. And working with youth, it's incredible to hear how the youth that I work with, by and large, are really so open-minded and not afraid of that gray area that Jessica's talking about. So that's one thing that I just wanted to touch on, and that sort of deals with transgendered issues that are more and more, thankfully, are becoming issues that people are dealing with, and we have to deal with these gender issues. Right down to the forms that we use. If you have an intake form, for example, it's male or female. You have to ask that. Some people aren't comfortable with that, and it's those things that are that fundamental that I think we have to be looking at, in addition to reducing the individual actions and verbal assaults and et cetera. But I think it's a broader picture than that. The other thing I wanted to touch on was the issue of sexuality, and I couldn't agree more that we live in a sex-negative society.
What does that mean, a sex-negative society?
Just a society that perceives sex as something that is negative, in the sense that it should happen someplace else. And that has really severe effects on gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered youth. I agree that sexuality isn't the only part of our lives, but it's a significant part. It's an incredible part, and to desexualize that, I think would be not doing anybody a favor. I think that the risks, certainly the sexual risks that GLB, transgendered and questioning youth face, certainly couldn't be dealt with if we desexualized their lives, or minimize that sexual part, because we should celebrate it. It's a fantastic thing. Sex is not bad. Sex is fantastic, and certainly that's the approach that we try to take as much as possible in our orientation exploration groups. When you look at why, for example, gay and bisexual males, in terms of HIV infections, are on the rise, it's not because they don't know how to use a condom. We all know how to use condoms. It's because, or that they don't have access to it. It's because the sex negativity around us has affected their self-esteem to such an extent that they don't care enough to take care of themselves. So it's these broader issues that we have to look at if we're going to deal with some of the risks, and certainly sexual risks are a big part of that. I could go on about the sexual risks because they're really important to me, and I think there's something that, because our sex-negative society, because of it, we often don't deal with it. We don't table it, and people hear sex and they think, can't deal with that.
Which is strange, because we're a society that uses sex in advertising, but if anybody actually talks about doing it, it's kind of taboo.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between sexual objectification and actually dealing with sex in a really healthy, positive, celebratory way. And to deal with it in that celebratory way, I think would be a really positive impact on everybody, including gay and lesbian, bisexual, trans youth. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Michael. We'll get back to you shortly. Tom Warner, one area on the broad general scope of the issue, and a question to a panelist.
Well, I actually wanted to continue a little bit with the sexuality aspect, because I think it's really fundamental. It is our sexuality that leads to everything else. It leads to the discrimination, it leads to the violence, it leads to the marginalization, it leads to the social oppression that we all experience. And so when I mentioned earlier that the organization that I belong to is committed to lesbian and gay liberation, it's in particular sexual liberation that we're committed to, and I support what a lot of I support what some of the other panelists have said, in that I don't want us to be, quote, accepted because we're essentially the same as heterosexuals. I want us to be accepted because we are different from heterosexuals, because we are, and I want to be able to celebrate that difference without facing discrimination and harassment and all kinds of other things. And I don't believe, for example, I do disagree with you, Mike, to the extent, I believe that sexuality between two women or two men is quite different from sexuality between a man and a woman. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that our community can teach people a lot, other people a lot about sexuality because of our views about sexuality, our multifaceted relationships, our rejection of some of the notions, for example, that genitalia is gross and disgusting and sex itself is gross and disgusting. It is something that should be celebrated, that fantasy and playing and giving sex some adventure and all of that kind of stuff, which is very much a part of the lesbian and gay community, needs to be preserved and celebrated, and at the same time should not result in us being harassed or discriminated against. And so I always feel the need for us to be very careful as we are working towards eliminating discriminatory laws or making change in other ways, that we not put forward that in order to achieve that, we have to be the same as heterosexuals, because it's our difference that, as I said at the beginning, is the starting point for everything else. And I'd like to keep the difference.
Okay, and before you ask your question, other panelists, there's two other individuals who'd like to pick up what you say. Mike?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Tom. I didn't intend to sort of negate the difference, and the obvious difference in the sexuality. So certainly apologize if you thought that was my intention. But I do want to just reiterate that I've seen some roads made, or I've had some success myself as a straight person challenging other straight people who are prejudiced by beginning there. I didn't mean to say that, ultimately, I would want to end up there saying everybody has their own choice, and it is okay because the person chooses. Whereas what I've found is straight males, certainly in youth, that's where they begin with the sexuality piece. And I've found an ability to be able to slow them down in terms of their prejudice and be able to say, look at what you're saying. Just because you're all freaked out about the sexuality doesn't make you right. It doesn't make the sexuality wrong. Let's just carry over here where you'd be quite comfortable in a totally male-oriented group for a relationship. And in fact, straight males use other males for relationships, problem solving, etc. So it's not uncommon once they put it into the right focus. But at the same time, I didn't really realize that your point until you mentioned it. So it's certainly helpful to mention it to me. So as I try to do the best I can with it, certainly not being an expert at all and not having the same experience, to appreciate that piece rather than assume I had one of the answers, even though some of that has been successful. It's a piece that I didn't really understand until you spoke about it. So it is helpful to hear it.
Fair enough, great. Bruce Watt had a quick comment to make on Tom's comments as well, and so does Jessica Bell.
Well, I'm just bringing in some of the points here together as I'm listening to all my friends here on the panel. And I have to agree with Michael that it is a very difficult environment to talk about sex in Canada. And me as a police officer, I certainly agree with that. And I'm certainly not qualified to discuss issues of sexuality and the root cause for homophobia. But as a police officer dealing with hate crime, I can say without a doubt people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender face many, many challenges of abuse, hatred, prejudice, and discrimination. And that I can say without any question.
Jessica Bell, thank you.
I just would like to pick up on what Tom is saying and broaden it out a little bit. I would agree, Tom, entirely that our sexuality is not the same and that we do need to celebrate the difference. But in this very sex-negative society, which Mike McKay picks up on, we have been so anxious to control it that we tend to restrict sexuality to simple genital acts, and we think that that's all there is to it. And that's very often why people do freak out, because they think that's all you're talking about. They don't understand that sexuality is what causes all the connections we have between each other. They don't necessarily have anything to do with who you jump into bed with. They certainly would include that.
And there's more depth to...
There's far more depth. There's far more emotional depth and spiritual depth. But if there's no sexuality, then there's no connection between us. That's really what it's about.
Right. And question for Tom Warner to another panelist. If you wanted to pass, that's okay.
Yeah, I'll pass on that, thanks.
Okay. Bruce Watts.
One of the biggest challenges that I face dealing with policing and homophobia and hate crimes against the LGBT community is, ironically, the fear in which they have because of the hostile environment that we have in Canada towards them is one of the main reasons it makes it very difficult for us in policing to help address those issues. The reporting rate for crimes against gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people is horrendously low, ironically so, because of the fear of coming out if they report crimes to the police, which is one of the many dynamics of why we are not getting the reports. Some of the other reasons that may exist could be because of the history that the police have, the courts have, the legal system has dealing with those issues is not good. Bottom line is, without policing to help intervene and help resolve these problems, the perpetrators get away with it. The cycle of violence is likely to continue, and we aren't doing any type of social engineering to correct these ills at all. So we have to kind of break that cycle by making sure that the GLBT community becomes comfortable with the police, and that's a very, very tough road ahead of us.
But I think some of the what John and Tom and Jessica brought up is the root causes of homosexuality or sexuality in itself as a human being. And until they come to, the mainstream society comes to some firm understanding, the police, the lawyer, the Crown, and the judges, then it's going to be sort of an endless cycle of the same thing over and over, I would suggest.
Very much so, but policing we're more at the end of the road when addressing these issues. There are many social ills before we get to deal with the criminal acts that have to be addressed. We're in a luxurious position where we only have to lock it and pocket and put away the bad guys. But we do have innovative ways to assist us to do that in a better way, and that is with the community.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a question for any other panelists? Oh, and I guess Mike McKay wanted to pick up on that. Sorry, Mike.
If I could. Yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, we're talking about sexuality and then we talk about policing. I thought, there's a parallel here. In terms of, if you look at the attempts in the late 80s, early 90s to promote healthy sexuality and safer sex amongst gay and bisexual men, that policing aspect is very similar, and that mistrust aspect can be paralleled in that way, in the sense that agencies who didn't understand the lives of gay and bisexual men dictated to them how to have sex. You know, always use a condom 100% of the time. That sort of philosophy. And then the mistrust of those agencies who told them they had to do this. I mean, that's one aspect of it. So similar to the police department, policing in general might have that same parallel, or does have that same parallel. So that might be some of the mistrust that gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered questioning people have in terms of accessing and reporting. That there's just this legacy of mistrust with institutions such as police departments. Even though, I mean, I live in Ottawa and I know how progressive Ottawa Carleton Police Department is. I've worked with them on a number of issues. I know that, but that again, that legacy of mistrust is still there. So,
one of the observations that I've made from an article from Capital Extra about what you had made, that rural people don't have the same access to services as larger cities.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, I work with youth primarily, and to run an orientation exploration group on an evening in Ottawa, downtown Ottawa, I mean, how do you explain that away to your parents if you happen to be living with your family? That, you know, I'm going here once a week. I mean, the services are there, and oftentimes, I mean, I'm lucky to work in YSB where the services are fantastic, but there's still this, again, we always go back to that larger issue. There's a larger issue than having the services there. It's dealing with the societal barriers that are there, and one of those societal barriers is heterosexism and homophobia and biphobia and it's really difficult to access the services when you're living in a society that is homophobic and is heterosexist. I mean, the services are there. So, I mean, just in terms of geography, when you're living in a rural setting, I mean, you're away from where the centers of the services are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mike Gobey, do you have any input here?
I guess not so much a question as a challenge, I guess, and I think Bruce and some of the other people in the panel have hit it. Obviously, crime and punishment is not going to solve any social ill, and we come back to education and understanding and really a self-awareness of who we are as individuals. But I guess I throw the challenge out. I know that often we do education for large organizations, groups, governments, and I guess the challenge that I throw out to the group here, and certainly the community that I serve, is to help us understand how we can do a better job, and also to help send that message back. Again, people like Bruce in Ottawa Carleton are doing a lot of outreach. We're trying to do that in our own community. And how can we start to overcome some of the historical attitudes and really try to get into the community to show that our attitudes have changed, our approaches have changed, and we need to work cooperatively.
In fact, you have had communication with the Kingston Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual Association as far as communication, police officers going over there and lesbian and gays going to the police department and communicating in a more often than they once did?
Well, that's certainly true. I know I've done a number of speaks over with the community and had a number of people come back, and that's always an interesting forum, of course, to have an afternoon of hate crime discussion, but basically to talk about gay and lesbian issues in a police learning environment. There's many sometimes crossed arms, etc. But everyone walks away at the end of the day with a deeper understanding and examining again what we are there for and who we're there to serve. And sometimes there's many invisible communities within the larger community that we don't get to see. And again, I have to take the challenge that it's up to the police and it's up to any organization to go out there and to make those bonds with the communities and not wait for them to come and knock on the door, because it may be a long time before.
Well, exactly, and that's why I commend the Kingston Police Services for to take the initiative to go and talk, because as one individual who was put to the Kingston Police Services Board, once in 1995 and again in 1997, to have a committee similar to the one in Ottawa and Toronto, to have a lesbian, gay, bisexuals committee to expand the discussion. They won't do it. They don't want it. The racism, they can deal with it, no problem. But there's been suggested by rank and file police officers that there would be a whole cross-section of individuals form a committee. They don't want it. Separate, they don't want it. So I guess when you don't have a community-based Kingston Police Services Board that is pro-gay and accepting and tolerating, where do you go? I mean, you have to. But what has come on is that the police administration and the rank and file officers have picked up the pieces and gone about themselves, when the Kingston Police Services Board has done very little to accommodate the two sides in heightened communication.
Well, I guess just in response, I guess it's up to all of us to increase the awareness and education and understanding of all members of the community, and that includes all facets of government and organizations. And certainly there's a willingness and openness within the police community, and we've done some what we call community development outreach, which again Ottawa Carleton's been doing, a number of other police services, and it's really rewarding to see people come back from spending a day going out, finding out more about their own community, coming back and really understanding more about the people that they're serving out there. So I know that the willingness is there, so the future is ours to work with.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I guess you have no comment on the current situation of the Kingston Police Services Board. That's okay. I don't think I'm in a position to really comment or aware of how the board the board is going to change shape within the next few weeks, and there's all sorts of things that as the new city becomes a new city, we may be seeing some different and changing attitudes as well. Okay, thanks, Mike. Wesley Critchlow, your perspective on this?
On what? There's so many issues.
Well, there is. Pick a couple and go for it.
I guess if we're talking about change in society, I would like to sort of keep mine specific to the black community in terms of the work I do. And I think there's a lot of work that takes place in the whole sphere of popular culture. And rap music and other forms of popular cultural expressions, and particularly in the context of black culture, tends to present black culture as very homophobic, much more than other cultures. So I think if we're talking about changing the minds of youth or young people, certainly music and the investments that youth have in music is one form or arena in which I think we can form alliances with artists who are interested in doing a form of not so popular type of rap, but anti-heterosexist work. I think investments in family and religion are very crucial in understanding how people are going to shift or not shift. Family and religion shapes people's minds, and family and religion is community and it's home for a lot of people. How you work around family and community, I think, is crucial. And I talk about the black community here, where I think religion is so crucial in terms of how one finds solace on a Sunday or a Saturday from the hard work, from the week of turmoil. And you go to church and you get that everlasting redemption, and you feel so great. There's a sense of community that the church gives to people who feel powerless in society on a daily basis. So I think how we work around religion and how religion in itself sort of produces different alternatives to what presently exists can also be quite, I guess, empowering. Families, in the sense that family, again, is community and family is home. If you can access, or if you can find ways of resourcing parents, because we do a lot of work with youth and we don't really talk about the adults. We somehow assume the adults are far gone, and I don't really think the adults are far gone. I think people do learn at different times in their lives and do shift. We need to also sort of create a kind of programs and relationships and alliances with parents who I think, if given the right perspective on things, will shift, will change. I know a lot of parents talk about seeing things on talk shows. I personally don't like talk shows. I mean, I find them humorous. But it is a starting point for a lot of people who do nothing else but sit at home. And certainly the type of responsibility talk shows hosts take on is crucial. The kind of guests you bring on your shows are crucial. The type of resources you bring on your shows are crucial. Because all these different avenues we must use in terms of reaching people. And it's not simply about talking about youth in isolation from the parents, or in isolation from the church or the family. So I guess what I'm saying is that all these institutions are interconnected, and we must work with how the interconnectedness works in terms of how it shapes and influences people's lives.
Excellent points, yes. Mike Vey.
I just want to elaborate, or even go prior to what Wesley's comments are, because it's almost like he had the answer, that the sense of community with both church and family gives young people and indeed adults the kind of support they require. And just even getting before that, if I had spoken before, it might have been his answer, because when we look at the kids we see, or the young people we see at our agency in Toronto, 60% of those young people are born elsewhere than the Greater Toronto area, and you get some of that kind of movement anyway to the bigger city. But 25% of them attribute the reason they moved to Toronto so that they could find community and they could find a peer group. So it's a pretty significant statement that, in this case, 80 young people have to head to Toronto. And then there's the isolation that goes along with that. It's pretty significant that people should be aware of the effect of their homophobia against young people. And secondly, when I was trying to do some reading before coming, and one of the reports had commented that a group of young people studied reported 40% of them had been assaulted simply because they were not heterosexual. And of those people, they commented that 61% of those assaults occurred in their families. So then you get back to this idea, which Wesley talks about, that the community that a young person has to have in order to feel okay, and to be not isolated, to feel good about their sexuality, etc. It's missing in a lot of these kids, and unfortunately, a lot of them hit the street when they hit Toronto. So then they're in again into the drug use, the prostitution. They're at risk, high risk for depression and suicide. So when they don't have that community, everything becomes more complex for them. And indeed, that's where the group work with youth begins. You mean, as we heard earlier from Michael, you bring them in, you make them feel okay about who they are immediately, like you're okay because you're with a group of people who understand you, and that you can tell your story and feel supported, and that's the beginning of everything. But it does become, as basic as it seems, it's so difficult to provide all that, the community, sense of community and family.
I think it's an ageless thing, too. I mean, no matter how old you are, there's still a child inside you. And there's a need for education, and there's a need for development. Nobody has the answers, and life is a progressive experience. Brian Yelland.
I think that as I look at the society that we live in today as Canadians, it seems to me that we are in the midst of a tremendous experiment in multiculturalism and multi-ethnicity as a result of the way Canada has taken shape over the last 100 years and who has come to Canada in the last, probably more the last 50 years. I think we have a tremendous potential here to formulate one of the most humane and diverse communities on the face of the earth. Unfortunately, it seems that there are factors going the other way that aren't particularly Canadian, I don't think, but there seems to be more fracturedness, more fracturalism, I don't know what the word is, in our society than ever before, it seems to me. There are more forces pulling us apart right now than ever before, whether they are economic or political or regional or whatever they are. We seem to be falling apart at the seams. And we also seem to be in a political era in which the message basically is that you are on your own. There is no one else who cares enough to look after you. You're on your own. And all these, I think, lay seeds of a society in which this whole tremendous experiment could go down the tubes, it seems to me, if we do not learn how to actually care for each other and like each other and learn to live with each other, even if there's something we don't like about each other, and to live with a healthy sense of intimacy and sexuality, and to live with a sense of community. I don't know what are the structures in our society that are going to lead us back in the direction we want to go. I don't know where they are exactly. I believe in family, community, and church for myself, but it's a difficult struggle. The families are struggling, communities are struggling, and I'm not at all convinced the church is providing a leadership role in this regard. I think that those three institutions ought to, and I think many other parts of our society ought to as well, but I don't know exactly how it's going to happen. Prevailingly, our culture is aimed more at computers and television screens, and I don't know that the societal change we're looking for is going to come from there. I'm not convinced. I like Rosie, but I'm not sure.
Fair enough. Thank you, Brian. Jessica Bell.
I would pick up again a little bit on what Brian said. I think what we do lack is a sense of community, because in Western society we've emphasized the individual, which has been very important in terms of some of our developments, but we've emphasized individuality over community to such an extent that we do have this feeling that we are supposed to manage on our own, that we're supposed to deal with everything that life throws at us, and that there are not people around there to help us deal with, life's turbulence, which happens every day. But I think that we're going to have to learn, probably from people in the third world, who have got to deal with community, because they deal with peer survival. And if they don't stick together as community, they don't survive. We haven't had to do that. We have our, our mail order things and our televisions and our computers, and we can go from one end of the week to the other without talking to anybody. But I think the other thing that I would like to pick up on, which is just an extension of what most people have been talking about, is we need to not to forget that it isn't just children or young people who need this. There are a great many adults, especially elderly adults, in hospitals, in nursing homes, in psychiatric institutions, who have grown up in a very, very homophobic culture and who don't dare talk to anybody. And somehow we have got to get this word out to places like that, that these people also need to be thought about, and they need to be not forgotten, because we tend to sort of discard people as they get older. And there's all kinds of people who don't even discover until they're older what their orientation is.
Exactly, yes. Thank you. Michael McKay, observation about the overall issue?
I guess I just want to speak to, I'm going to take it back to youth. I totally agree with what you're saying in terms of people who are older, but I will take it back to youth for a second, speak to youth community. And Mike was talking about, bringing youth into the OE group, the orientation groups, and that community. It develops. It's not instantaneous, but I think what we haven't talked about today a lot is the peer education aspect of it, and the incredible efforts that youth themselves are putting out, and really providing service youth to youth, and the amount of empathy and understanding that can take place between youth is incredible. And it can really combat something else that we haven't really touched on today. And that's internalized homophobia. I think it's probably been mentioned a couple of times, but I think it's important to address. It's a really significant issue. Someone mentioned that that gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered identified people who are, for example, in a workshop on GLB issues, might be like preaching to the converted. But I think there's a lot of benefit that GLBT people can receive from ongoing trainings and sensitivity trainings and support to help them deal with that internalized homophobia that they're experiencing and internalized biphobia that they're experiencing. Jessica talked about people living lives up to like 60 years old and then discovering that they're and then coming out at age 60, and think about all the crap that they had to hear and deal with, and where did it go? Well, they internalized it, because there is no other venue to talk about some of that hurt that you experienced throughout your life, and internalized homophobia that's at the root of the self-esteem issues, and that's at the root of suicidal ideation, and that's at the root of depression, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a really important topic. But
Wesley Crucial, you want to comment on that?
I think it's sort of crucial when we talk about education that we also sort of examine what investments we have in it ourselves. Because when we talk about educating youth or adults, I think each group brings different investments in terms of the limits as to what they would like to do. And so it's important to sort of calculate the pros and the cons of what you're doing, the risk involved. For most gay and lesbian activists, I think outing is a big thing. They would like to out everybody who they think is gay or lesbian. But there's a number of consequences in terms of people when they take education up. To what extent does that education get translated into, say, a family discussion? To what extent does that education get translated into a social peer group discussion? And I raise that as an issue that is crucial in the sense that people have a lot of investments, and a lot of those investments are materially based. A lot of those investments are family based. A lot of those investments are community based. And to be identified with or to be seen in the presence of sort of tarnishes one's image. And the way the work is done and the kind of institutions that are created for the work. This is why I go back to the whole issue of leadership in terms of the communities that have leaders that people respect, are people that are crucial to have on board with the work you do, because the whole issue of legitimizing the work you do is crucial. If your work is not legitimized by others who people view as credible within your communities, you're always going to be viewed as a fringe person trying to do something. And what we are doing is not fringe, what we're doing is crucial. So I think it's important that the alliances are formed. I mean, as I said earlier when we first started, the criticisms that I had of the white gay and the lesbian community have been its inability to bring in people of color. Hence, the work gay and lesbian has always been translated as a very much a white genre, and that is something I think I don't even think it has shifted yet, but it's certainly something that when they do work, we do get some effects of that in the black community, because the issues get debated. But the issues get debated as an external issue, not as an internal issue. But with the forming of alliances, that issue will also get debated as both an internal and external issue. So that's the kind of investments and alliances and stuff I'm talking about that needs to take place in the work we are doing.
Fair enough, yes. Brian Yellen, you had your hand near the mic.
It's a slightly different issue, though, so if anyone wants to go on that one, I defer.
Time. Okay, three of us are watching the time. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, it's the issue that I thought there might be some discussion on is in your definition of homophobia, you referred to the notion of myth. This is an interesting one, I think. Sometimes people dislike people they perceive to be or know to be homosexual on the basis of some mythology that is incorrect. In other words, they have incorrect information, either about them or about their lifestyle. But often it is the case that people actually don't believe myths, they believe the truth. They do know what the actual situation is, but they are against it for whatever reason. And I think sometimes there isn't a discussion on those issues, on just people's objection to others' orientation and behavior, which is not based on myth, so it doesn't actually qualify, I suppose, under this definition of homophobia, but it may be for what are moral reasons or cultural reasons or whatever. And the question then is, when we aren't dealing with myth, when we're dealing with the reality, how do we educate and deal with those kinds of issues? I'm interested in knowing how we do that.
Wesley, you have any ideas for that?
I'm sorry, I was signed out.
Okay.
I didn't hear the last part of the question.
Oh, well, how do you go about achieving some of the things that you discussed and breaking myths down?
Start with yourself.
It starts with yourself.
As simple as that. I don't think you need to always assume that the problems are external. Start with yourself. There's a lot of internal problems we have.
And so just simply putting aside old prejudices and carry it on?
No, you can't put it aside. We walk with prejudices every day. We walk with stereotypes every day. We are inundated with it. We are implicated in it. And I think we need to examine and ask ourselves what they are and be honest about it. We can't be educators if we ourselves are implicated in the very process of stereotypes that we are trying to work on. I mean, it will be to do an injustice to the work we are doing.
Fair enough. Bruce Watts.
I think that we all in society, and I follow on with what Wesley is saying, is we have a responsibility to change the standard of what's acceptable and the sense of propriety of what we want Canada to be. And we see that best in policing, because there is a certain element in our society that say it's okay to be homophobic. That is a dominant aspect of what we deal with every day. So one of the things we're trying to do in policing is to try to be partners in the social change, to make sure that GLBT members in our community are comfortable just to be who they are, and I'd feel free of persecution and being crime victims. Now, one of the things I've done often, and we've done in policing, is we go out to the schools and various other community groups, and we are partners in education. Two general messages is the people who are victims of hate crime, and this is really relevant for the GLBT community, is we try to tell them and get them to be comfortable with the police. We're there for you. We're partners in this. Please feel comfortable so we can help stop the cycle of violence. The other message is to the group that's likely to do hate crimes, who are homophobic, the gay bashers. We're telling them this is no longer socially acceptable. Society has changed. Get on the bandwagon, because we'll be very pleased to put you in jail if you're involved in this type of activity. So those are the two message groups, and those are the two things we're doing to try to just change the social standard. One thing concerning sexual orientation issues, when I've had the opportunity to speak to youth in schools and various other things, and this is a general observation I've had, I talk about issues of race, ethnicity, religion. Their ears are open. They're attentive. No giggles. As soon as you switch to issues of sexual orientation, for some reason, you can see at the back of the classroom there are the giggles. It seems to be okay to do that still when dealing with issues of sexual orientations. And we have to make sure we shut that down when we hear that.
Fair enough, fair enough. We have three more people that just quickly, one with Jessica, Brian, and Mike, do you have anything you want to add in terms of any questions you heard from someone, or question someone on any issues? Although we fairly covered it pretty good. Okay, and anyone else? Well, this is the close of our show. I hope that we were able to shed some light and put some new perspectives on some old prejudices and ideas. Thank you for watching. Good night.